Hello, and welcome back to City Skylines Rochester. In this episode, I'm going to begin to lay out some of the freeway infrastructure in downtown Rochester. The main focus of this video will be the portion known as the Interloop Expressway, a sunken freeway winding through downtown. Later in the video, I'll also be discussing a few of the concepts proposed by the city as they plan to address the section of freeway in the future, including ideas such as removing the freeway entirely and restoring the city grid in the north. To start off the video today, I'm working on the western interchange for the Interloop, connecting access from downtown to I-490. This system interchange in the Cascade District is one of the items up for removal in certain concepts for the future of the North Interloop proposed by the city. In cases in which the Interloop Expressway were to be completely removed from the city, there would be no need for continued connection to I-490 in the west. Removal of the exit ramps would allow for minor redevelopment opportunities in the west of the city, but would also redirect traffic flowing to and from the city. This isn't always necessarily a bad thing. In fact, with concepts such as induced demand created by the introduction of highways and direct connections, the opposite could be argued to be seen from the removal of such a section of expressway. This would result in lowering the overall demand and need for the connections. When construction began on the Interloop in 1953, Rochester was a rapidly growing city. Over the next 13 years, the city's grid was transformed to allow for the growing population in the area to quickly and more easily access downtown from the suburbs. The solution of the time was to build a sunken expressway through the north and east of downtown Rochester, connecting those outer suburbs directly to the city. To build the expressway, hundreds of homes, offices, parks, factories, and churches, and more would be destroyed. At the time, this was seen as a positive development, as car-oriented planning was at the forefront of 1950s and early 1960s city planning. As the freeway was nearing completion, the city was already beginning to see the population of the area decline as suburbanization began to take effect in the 1960s. More and more people were leaving the cities for life in the suburbs as cars became more affordable. City planners of the time worked to accommodate the additional traffic by overbuilding freeways and providing plenty of connections. It would not be until decades later, in the 1990s and early 2000s, that planners began to consider the faults of car-oriented planning and development. In 1991, the City of Rochester unveiled their Vision 2000 plan. This plan outlined how the city believed reconnecting downtown to the surrounding neighborhoods through removal of the inner loop could revitalize the city and improve residents' quality of life. The plan specifically called for the removal of the southern portion, also known as Interloop East. Over the next few decades leading up to 2014, city planners in Rochester would conduct studies and attempt to secure funding for the removal of the Interloop East. I'll talk about this a bit more later in the video. When I started this series, I had the same goal in mind that I had for my Pittsburgh series. I plan to take on a second Rust Belt city to try to see what positive city planning improvements could look like in action. I want this project to not only be educational for the city of Rochester by sharing history and details about the city, but also educational for the game and creating realistic cities by showing the mods and the tools I use, as well as showcasing the assets that bring everything together. Lastly, I hope that this series inspires you to think about your own city and how it's designed, or even leads you to want to recreate and improve your own town or city. If you plan to take on any particular areas, let me know in the comments below. I'm always interested in seeing and hearing about City Skylines projects that people are working on. For this project, I plan to focus on the immediate downtown area, at least at first. I plan to break it into a few small parts to make things easier, but later on, I'm going to attempt to recreate the downtown skyline, an immediate area with a high level of detail. With both this project and my Pittsburgh project, I'm setting out with the goal of creating highly detailed, realistic cities. But I also want the cities to function and have the same general zoning so that the simulation can be somewhat realistic and comparable to real life. With that in mind, I'm I'm also making sure that the configuration of the freeways I'm placing, as well as the surrounding roads, are all correct. By using road assets from the workshop, such as North American Freeways by Gray Flame, the Big US Roads Pack by Hockenheim 95, and Blank Roads by TDW, I'm able to make sure that every road is properly represented in-game with the correct directions and amount of lanes. Some additional details, you'll also see me using the retaining wall networks by Cluse and these basic slope profiles by Tahix. These offer a bit more realism to the sunken highway by covering up some of the clipping and rough edges of the elevated roads. I also use a decent amount of foliage to represent what is seen in real life. I highly recommend the workshops of Podelmo, Avator, and Mr. Mason for anything related to nature. If you enjoy infrastructure and detailing episodes like this, let me know below. This episode is nearly 100% just focusing on the sunken highway and detailing it to be as realistic as possible. If there's an interest in more episodes like this, I'd be happy to share how I take on some of the other freeway interchanges and detailing those later on as well. One other thing I'll mention is that if you haven't joined the Discord for this channel yet, I highly recommend you to do so. If you're a fan of Rochester and Pittsburgh content, I post a lot of the behind-the-scenes screenshots and updates there of what I'm currently working on. It's also a great place to share your own City Skylines builds and discuss the game as well as real-life city planning. Joining the Discord is also a great way to interact with the series and the projects that I'm working on. I'm especially looking for any Rochester or Pittsburgh locals to collaborate and give feedback with the series or share photos and experiences of the areas that I'm working on. If you're interested in participating in the discussion and want to access the behind-the-scenes Discord, feel free to join with a link in the description below. The Inner Loop East Transformation Project in 2014 saw the removal of the expressway from the southeastern part of the city. The $17 million freeway removal project allowed for the reconnection of the city grid and was a major catalyst for many successful new developments within the city. With this project under the city's belt, the planners are now setting their sights on the northern Inner Loop portion and have proposed plans to redevelop the area, with concept plans ranging from changing the expressway into a bypass to fully removing the expressway and reconnecting the city grid, similar to how it was pre-1953. I've included links to the project proposals as well as concepts in the description below. Feel free to comment below and let me know which one of these proposals interests you the most. camera, I finished some connections to the highway so that I could start to get some traffic going through it. This helped me as later on I adjusted the road's elevations to match the real-life expressway, and the traffic helped to make sure everything looked realistic for the clearances and to make sure that no trucks were clipping through bridges. You may also notice that I've added some additional details like these guardrails to bring everything together a bit for this stretch of the expressway. As I mentioned before, I'm now using some of the nature assets by Bedomo and Abattoir to detail the sides of the Sunken Expressway. As always, I start by using Google Earth to see what each location looks like, and then I add detailed foliage to replicate everything that I see. I try to get everything accurate down to the smallest of bushes. I then use Move It to scale everything and sync objects to the correct heights. After completing foliage on both sides, I go back and I add some of these block assets and I shape them with procedural objects to align with the roads, putting the final details on this overpass. Now, I'm working on the foliage and final details for where the expressway terminates into East Main Street and North Union. I'll be adding some additional retaining walls and supports as well over here using the assets by Cluse and Ronnie 69 to tie everything together. one of the final details for this expressway, I'm placing some of the first freeway signs. I'm using the California Freeway Signs by Ghostwriter MX and the mod procedural objects to customize them with text and other details to match real life.